And now it's time for a preview of an upcoming game by Tom Vasel.
One of my favorite games that I've played this year so far is Empires of the Void. This was on Kickstarter last year, and it came out in a very nice production copy. It's a space game, and one of the things I really liked about Empire of the Void was the artwork. Well, now I'm doing a preview here of their next game that the company's coming out with, and that is City of Iron. And the theme where different small nations are trying to rebuild the big city to become the main big guy city. It has very similar artwork style to it, but it is a very different game. Let's look at it. There's a lot boiling around in this game, so I'm going to try to simplify it for you as much as possible. The game is not a difficult one to play, but there are many different things that you can do. One of the interesting things about this game is at the beginning of each turn, you're going to be picking turn order. And you're going to do that here on this track. Each person here has a marker on this track. And what you will do is you'll start with the person who went last turn. And that person is going to pick where they would like to go in turn order. So there's always 4 0 spots. You can put it there. So I say I want to go first. But green might be willing to pay 3 coins to go even before me. Brown says, I don't care, I'll go second. Orange says, I want to go last, so he puts it back here. So you can fight over first place, but you can also fight over last place. Each of these spots has different amounts of money that you can pay to go first or last. So you'll do that at the beginning of each turn. And then players on their turn are going to have different actions. Now let's talk about what we're trying to do. In the course of this game, there's going to be building cards that are coming up here. You can see that there's 12 building cards here on the table, and at least 4 new ones are going to come out every turn. Likely more than that. And as these new ones come out, there's going to be scorecards that show up, and those will happen 3 times during the game. The 3rd scoring card is the end of the game. Now, I should mention, as I always mention with these previews, that the components here are obviously not finished yet with cards without artwork on them, and so take that into account. But some of the artwork is done, and it's really, really good. But when these scoring cards come up, all 3 scoring cards basically are concentrating on each of the different resources here. So you can see there's turnips, and here you have these weird sheep things. There's shrika and moss, and each of these things, whoever has the most of that type is going to get a certain number of victory points, and the second most will get a certain number of victory points. And as the resources get better, those victory points all the way down to here, 6 and 4, will also get better. Also, what players will be doing over the course of the game is they'll be tracking how many resources they have of each of the types, and if they reach the shield, they get a victory point period, whether or not they have the most, and if they do have the most, it gives them an extra victory point. There's also a few buildings that will give victory points also. So, players will have 3 actions on their turn, and their whole goal is to get these victory points. And so they will do that through various means. One of the actions a player can do is they can buy one of these buildings. And there's different buildings, and you can see the cost here at the bottom. This building here has a cost of 2. The Academy has a cost of 5. Many buildings have a cost of money and have a cost of science. And so you'll need to get a science resource, which incidentally here the Academy provides. Most of these buildings provide resources, and when you buy that building and you place it in your city, you will then take a marker and you'll move the amount of resources that you got in that certain type. Again, you're trying to have the most of each of the types. You're going to be placing these buildings in your city. Now, each city that a player starts with, here you see, this is one of the example cities that a player will start with. And they're going to have a marker in this city, like this here. Now that means that they can put 5 buildings in that city. Once they've reached 5 buildings, they can blow buildings up and put new buildings in, destroy old buildings and put them in, but there's only room for 5 buildings per city. Now, they can also only put buildings in a city that have those markings on it. So you can see here, for example, they can put in this city the turnip farm. That's not a problem. The Academy has no symbol, and the moss gardens. And there's most of these buildings can go in their city, but as time goes by, other icons are going to show up that aren't in their city. Now, these cities and things will provide resources. One of the things that we need to take a look at now is the player's board. Each player has a different faction, which may or may not have special abilities, and that basically determines whether you play the family game or not. At the beginning of the game, you're going to start with 2 citizen cards that will go in your citizen deck, and you'll start with 2 military cards that will go in your military deck. And between turns, you're going to draw cards equal to these symbols here. So you'll always draw 1 citizen card, and you might draw more citizen and or soldier cards depending on different buildings that you get. One of your actions on your turn can be drawing one of these cards into your hand, which can be useful. And some of these cards have a special action that you can take. For example, you can see here the scholar has an action where he can collect 1 science. For him to collect that science, though, he has to pay a coin, and you need to discard a card with a hammer symbol. These cards can be discarded for different symbols. Each of the cards has different symbols on it that can be discarded. This symbol here means distance. That's used for building. You'll notice that these military cards have attacks on them. Attack 2 and attack 2 here. These attacks are used for another action you can take, and that's to conquer other towns. There are other towns on the board that you can conquer, for example, and there's 3 piles of them. There's an easy, medium, and harder pile. Each of these has a defense, and you need to have an attack value of at least that much to conquer it. And then it has a distance, and you have to discard cards that are equal to that distance when conquering that city. You can't use a card for attack and distance. It can only be one or the other. So you need to get more cards to conquer these better cities. Once you conquer a city, you'll get those resources, just like if you bought a building, and then you'll flip that city over, which will increase the defense because someone might want to conquer it from you and steal your resources. So there are 2 main ways to get resources: by building buildings and by conquering these towns. Now, a 2-card deck is not really that exciting, but the cool thing is, between turns, you are going to get money based on your income. Every time you have an income track here. Every time you buy a non-science building, your income will go up. Every time you conquer a town, your income will go up. And there's other ways to increase your income also. And you'll get that income between turns. If you have the majority of different resources, those will give you income bonuses. You will also, between turns, be able to use this income, and you have a deck of citizen and military cards, then you will be able to buy these. When you buy them, which will cost either money or money in science, you'll be able to place them directly in your hand. When you're done playing them during your turn, they will go to your discard pile, and the cool thing about your discard pile is that you can put cards in it in any order, and when you're out of cards in your draw pile, you'll take your discard pile and flip it over. So you can determine the order in which you will draw cards. Now, these cards give all sorts of special abilities and actions. You can see this guy has 2 distance, and he's tax +2. One of the actions you can take on your turn is to take a coin, and this guy will let you take 3 coins instead of that. Here's a cloud skimmer. Look, it gives you 3 distances, and it's an airship. Here's place a coin on a town you own. The town has +2 defense, and here I can add a district to a city. What does that mean? We'll check that out in just a moment. Explore, build a new city. We'll look at that one in a moment too. You can store a card as a free action. Many of the cards will give you a free action. Doesn't count as one of your 3 actions. You can store a card as a normal action, which is take one of these buildings and save it to later. You don't want to save too many cards, because at the end of the game, every 2 cards that you've stored and not actually built will lose you a point, and points can be very tight in this game. So there's all sorts of different cards that you can add to your deck, some very powerful military cards, and then you're also looking at the symbols on the side of the card to see what they provide. Now, there's many different actions that a player can take on their turn, and I mentioned several of them already. You can build a building, you can conquer a town, you can tax people and take money, you can store a card for later, but these 2 cards are important if you want to buy them and follow these. The Explorer and the Mayor. The Mayor lets you add a district to a city. When you do that, you take a city that you have, and then you take one of your district tiles, and each player has 3 of them. It has a plus number, and you put that there. That does 2 things for you. It increases the number of buildings that you can put in that city, and it also will allow you to draw more cards in between turns. The Explorer, on the other hand, lets you build a new city. There are new cities that are available for everybody. Each of these cities is going to require a certain number of distance, But once you build that city, you will then be able to place one of your tiles on it to show how many buildings that city can have, which will also allow you to draw extra cards per turn. And these new cities will have different icons in them. Like, for example, this one here has that floating island icon where some buildings can only be built in that area. Some cities require not just distance, like this one here requires 8 distance to find it, but also requires an airship, and other ones require a sailing vessel to get to them. So there are 8 of these extra cities out here that players can use getting the Explorer action. The game is going to progress. 4 of these cards are wiped out whether people buy them or not each time, and cards will slide over. And eventually the final scoring is going to occur. And final scoring is done just like other scorings, but also at that point players are going to score bonuses based on who has the most money, who has the most buildings, who has the most distance, who has the most cards in their hand, who's conquered the most, and so on and so forth. At that point, everybody who's keeping score on his track up here, the person who has the most points is the winner of the game. A few other things, you can see there's money and science tokens in the game, and there's also action tokens that you can turn over as you take your action each turn. And you continue to go through rounds, but the game does have a preset number of rounds. It's variable based on how many buildings that you build or are destroyed. Every time you conquer a town, another building's destroyed. So that keeps this building track moving pretty quickly. And 4 of them are also taken out between rounds. So there's a lot of different things that will keep that track moving. When that final scoring card comes up, the game will be over the following round. Last thing I need to mention is when a scoring card shows up, you score the following round. So you have 1 round to kind of prepare for scoring. And that's City of Iron. There are a lot of things that I really enjoy about this game, and some very unique things. The turn orders, I've seen variable turn orders before, but I've never seen one where you pay to go first or pay to go last. That's an interesting concept. The buildings and the resources, all the different, keeping track of your resources on the different charts, and being able to build buildings and or conquer them. There are some, maybe this would be described as a deck building game, but it's really not a deck building game. You're going to find that the most critical decisions that you make are between turns when you're picking which cards to buy. You can't afford more than a couple. And so you're not really building a deck, you're picking special actions that you can take. And it's a really neat concept because everyone is going to be picking different things. You can go the straight military route and just try to conquer as much as you can. You can go a straight merchant route and try to get as much money as you can to build buildings. You can try to build cheap resources, because if you get lots of cheap resources, that can bring in money to help you get points later on. There are special buildings that show up later on that will give you bonuses if you have the top thing in one of the different categories. And so the final buildings can be very important. There's special abilities for each of the 4 races that are included in the game that give you cards that no one else has, or special ability. For example, one of the races, they can build 6 buildings in their original town rather than 5. There's small differences, but they are noticeable, and they can kind of focus your strategy for that race. All in all, everybody that I played this game with was very interested, intrigued with it, also that they were going to kickstart it themselves. So you should too. So go check out the Kickstarter page right after the jump.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.